It does not matter where. You arrived at some point that, a few years ago, represented the horizon, the promotion, the title, the completed project, the standard of living achieved, the external marker that signaled you had covered the right distance in the right direction. And then the question came. Not immediately. The system is sophisticated enough for it to take a while, but it came. On a Sunday night, in a moment of silence between one achievement and the next, in an instant when the movement paused just long enough for something to surface. The question is not dramatic. It does not arrive as a declared crisis. It arrives as a thin dissonance, almost inaudible. Is this it? It is not ingratitude. It is not depression. It is not a lack of ambition. It is something more specific and more disturbing. The sensation that you pursued with genuine dedication, something that once reached, turns out not to be exactly yours. As if the horizon you spent years moving toward belonged to a map that someone drew before you had the vocabulary to ask where you wanted to go. You are here because that question did not leave, because the movement of going toward the next objective did not silence it completely. Because at some point you realized you do not know with clarity whether what you call success is a choice or an answer that was deposited in you before any genuine question could emerge. This video will not tell you what to do. It will open the mechanism. And the mechanism, when seen with precision, permanently changes what you are able to see in the structure that organizes your life. There is a form of loss of meaning that does not have the drama the culture associates with the term. It is not collapse. It is not the inability to function. Life continues with efficiency. The appointments are kept, the goals are pursued, the performance is maintained. What disappears is something else. It is the sensation that what you do and what you are hold a relationship of genuine belonging, that the effort you apply is connected to something that, if removed, would leave a real absence, not merely a functional gap in the calendar. This form of hollowing out is difficult to name within the available vocabulary, because the available vocabulary for speaking about meaning has been entirely colonized by the vocabulary of success. Are you fulfilled? Yes, by the system's criteria. Are you progressing? Yes, in terms defined before you arrived. Are you where you planned to be? Yes, in a plan whose coordinates were established before you had the maturity to question them. And what is missing has no name within that vocabulary, because what is missing comes before the categories the system offers. It is the question that was never asked, that the system worked actively to ensure would never need to be asked, about what you would want if the answers had not arrived first. Think about how the horizon of meaning was constructed. Before you had language to formulate preferences, there was already a grammar of value operating all around you. Certain trajectories were celebrated in the family, with the care of those who nurture, not the pressure of those who coerce. Certain categories of achievement were treated in school as the natural destinations of those who applied themselves adequately. The market presented configurations of successful life with the naturalness of someone who is not selling anything, merely showing how things are. None of these vectors needed to declare intent. None needed to say explicitly what you should want. They simply existed with enough density and consistency for the set of things that seemed desirable to take shape, not as a perceived imposition, but as a natural inclination, as a personal preference, as you. And the most efficient mechanism of that operation is not direct pressure, it is anticipation. The system does not wait for you to form a question in order to then offer the answer. It delivers the answer before the question forms. And by the time you reach the age of asking, the answer is already installed so deeply that it seems to have come from you. The desire you feel to reach certain markers of success is not false. It is genuine. You truly feel it. But the origin of that desire, when examined honestly, does not begin in you. It begins in a set of influences that operated before you had the instruments to perceive them as influences. This does not eliminate authorship, but it substantially complicates what it means to say that you chose what matters. The question that organizes this video is not whether success has value. That is a secondary question, and one the system prefers you ask because it keeps the debate within the terms it established. The primary question comes before it and is more uncomfortable. Who defined what success is, and how did that definition come to seem like yours? Heidegger called this mechanism impersonality, existence conducted by the one does, by the one values, by what everyone knows matters, without any specific subject ever having decided. Life lived on the rails of the anonymous, with the internal experience of choosing freely. That mechanism is what we are going to dissect now. Not to produce an alternative answer, to make visible the process by which the answer you carry was installed, and the real cost of having lived by it without ever examining it. Martin Heidegger, in the early 20th century, made an observation that remains one of the most disturbing in Western philosophy. Not because it is abstract, but because it describes with surgical precision something you experience every day without having the vocabulary to name it. Heidegger observed that most of human existence is not lived from within itself. It is lived from the Das Man, the one, the impersonal, what everyone does, what any reasonable person values. There is no specific subject behind these definitions. There is no identifiable authority that issued them. There is only the diffuse pressure of the anonymous collective, which defines what a well-lived life looks like with the naturalness of someone who is not defining anything, merely describing how things are. And Heidegger's central point is not that this mechanism is malicious. It is that it is efficient precisely because it is invisible. You do not feel that you are following what everyone does. You feel that you are doing what makes sense, what is reasonable, what anyone who thinks clearly would conclude. The Das Man is not an external force you can identify and resist. It is the texture of the obvious, the grammar of common sense, the set of evidence that does not need to be justified because its validity is self-sustained by the simple fact of being shared. And success, as it circulates socially, as it was presented to you from the time you had vocabulary to absorb presentations, operates precisely within that grammar, not as imposition, as a natural horizon, as the destination that any reasonable trajectory tends to produce if applied with sufficient dedication. The cost of this is not in the effort the race demands. It is in what is left out when you run toward a horizon that was never yours from the beginning. There is a scene that very few people examine because it happens before memory. You are 4, 5 years old. Someone in the family comments on what you will be when you grow up, not as pressure, as affection, as a fond projection of a future that seems promising. The category used is specific: doctor, lawyer, engineer, successful, stable, fulfilled. The words enter without a filter because the filter does not yet exist. You are 10 years old. School organizes effort toward measurable results. The good student is the one who performs according to the established criteria. The criteria are not questioned. They are the ground. The effort is real. The commitment is genuine, but the direction was already set before any question about direction was possible. You are 20 years old. The market presents configurations of successful life through every available channel, not as identifiable propaganda, but as landscape, as the set of things that fulfilled people have, do, are. Aspiration forms with the naturalness of someone who is simply developing their own taste. And you arrive at 30, at 40, with clear objectives, with genuine motivation, with the sensation that you know what you want, without realizing that the wanting was constructed by layers of anticipation that operated before you had the instruments to perceive them. It is not manipulation in the conspiratorial sense. It is something more precise. It is the colonization of the horizon of meaning before the subject has reached the point of needing a horizon. The desire is genuine. The origin of the desire is another question. Every system of meaning needs to be installed before the subject has the vocabulary to refuse it, because afterward it is too late. Childhood is not only the period of character formation, it is the period in which the horizon of value is deposited with enough depth to seem, for the rest of one's life, part of the subject rather than part of the system. By the time you finally have the maturity to ask what you want from life, the answer is already there, anticipating the question, filling the space it would occupy, making any deeper investigation unnecessary. The system does not need to silence the question. It only needs to ensure the answer arrives first. And it did, long before you. There is a distinction that is rarely made with clarity, the distinction between achieving something you elected as valuable and achieving something the system elected as a marker of being in the right place. Socially defined success belongs to the second category. It is not neutral. It is an instrument of social legibility. Those who achieve it signal that they have correctly internalized the environment's criteria. Those who do not are treated as a deviation to be corrected or as a case to be explained. The competition is real, the effort is real, but the prize is not an achievement. It is a credential of conformity. And the loss of meaning that many people experience upon reaching markers of success is not ingratitude. It is the moment when the distance between the prize and what would be genuinely satisfying becomes impossible to ignore. Genuine questions about meaning require silence. Not literal silence, cognitive silence. A space where the mind is not in task processing mode, executing protocols or consuming stimulation. That kind of silence is systematically prevented. The structure of the modern day, agenda, goals, entertainment available in every gap, functions as a permanent block to the kind of pause in which the hardest questions settle in. This is not an accident. It is the necessary condition for the ready-made answers to keep functioning without being verified. When you never stop long enough to ask in earnest, the answers that were installed before never need to be justified. They simply keep operating, as evidence, as common sense, as you. The obvious cost of pursuing success is the effort, time, energy, resources. That cost is visible and frequently celebrated as proof of dedication. The invisible cost is different and more serious. It is the set of questions that were never asked, the desires that never got to form, the directions that were never explored because the horizon was already defined before exploration could begin. You do not know what you lost because you never had access to the space where what was lost would have existed. And that not knowing is the system's most sophisticated product because it leaves no trace. There is no memory of it having been different. There is only the diffuse sensation that something is out of place without any specific object to which to assign the absence. There is a consequence of the mechanism that goes beyond the individual, and that is rarely articulated with this precision. When a system defines the horizon of meaning before the subject has the instruments to question it, it does not only capture individual desire, it captures the capacity to imagine alternatives. Because imagining alternatives requires a starting point that is outside the system. It requires a position from which the system can be seen as a system and not as reality. And when the system was installed before any exterior position was possible, the exterior position simply does not exist. You cannot imagine what you would want if the answers had not arrived first, not because you are incapable, but because the imagination was also formed within the same horizon that formed it. The alternatives you are able to conceive are alternatives within the system, not alternatives to the system. This has a practical and immediate consequence. The loss of meaning you experience frequently does not produce reorientation. It produces intensification. You feel empty within the race, and the available response within the system's vocabulary is to run faster toward the next marker, with the implicit promise that the next one will be different. That arriving at the next point will produce what arriving at the previous one did not. Heidegger described this as the flight from anxiety back into impersonality. The moment in which existence touches something genuine, the real question about what matters, and immediately retreats into the anonymous, into what everyone does, into the next objective the system offers as a destination. Not because the subject is a coward, but because the genuine question has no answer within the available vocabulary, and operating without an answer, without the rail the system provides, is an experience of disorientation for which the system never prepared anyone. The result is a continuous oscillation. The question is touched, there is a retreat, the movement intensifies, the question is touched again, there is another retreat, and the movement never produces the pause sufficient for the question to be inhabited honestly. Here is the mechanism with the precision it deserves. The system does not need censorship to ensure that certain questions are never asked. It only needs anticipation, the capacity to arrive with the answers before the questions form. And when the answers arrive first, they do not appear as answers. They appear as the fabric of reality, as what any sensible person would perceive if they looked without prejudice. Success, configured in this way, is not an achievement. It is sophisticated conformity with anonymous expectations. Expectations that no specific subject formulated, but that everyone sustains collectively by the simple fact of continuing to act as if they were self-evident. And the loss of meaning that settles in, not in failure, but frequently in achievement, is not a symptom of ingratitude or weakness. It is the moment when the distance between what was imposed as a horizon and what would have been chosen under conditions of genuine questioning finally becomes perceptible. Not as a dramatic revelation, as a thin fracture, as that Sunday night dissonance that the movement of the following week will silence. But that does not go away because the movement silenced it. It goes away only when it is examined, and the system never prepared anyone to examine it. Because examining it is the only movement the system cannot anticipate. The diagnosis has been laid out. Before you had the vocabulary to ask what you want from life, the world had already deposited an answer, not through the bad faith of specific individuals, but through the consistent operation of a system that needs its members to want the right things, and that discovered the most efficient way to ensure this is not to prohibit desires, but to colonize them before they form. Family, school, the market, culture, each of these vectors operated with its own logic, without central coordination, but with the cumulative effect of installing a horizon of meaning that arrived before consciousness did. That for this reason never seemed external. That simply seemed to be you, and the success you pursued with genuine dedication, with real effort, with conviction that was not false, was the direction that horizon pointed. Not the direction you would have pointed if you had arrived at the question before encountering the installed answer. This does not undo what was built. It does not invalidate the effort. It does not transform the trajectory into a mistake, but it changes what can be said honestly about it, and it changes the quality of the choices that follow, if there are to be any choices at all that depart from a genuinely different place. Now look at what this implies in relation to what you call your values. The things you say matter, the kind of life you consider well lived, the markers you use to evaluate whether you are on the right path, the criteria by which you would judge the failure and success of a trajectory. What proportion of those things was built by you, from experience and reflection that departed from somewhere genuinely yours? And what proportion arrived before, formed by the horizon the system installed while you still had no instruments to perceive that an installation was underway? That proportion is impossible to calculate with precision. Memory does not reach the period of formation with sufficient clarity, and even if it did, the influences that operate through anticipation leave no visible trace. They do not appear as influences, they appear as you. But the impossibility of calculating does not make the question any less real. It only reveals the depth of the mechanism. Because from the moment you see that the horizon was installed before the question, the sensation of loss of meaning changes in nature. It stops being a symptom of individual weakness, something to be corrected by more effort, more gratitude, more dedication to the next marker. And it becomes information about the structure, the moment when the distance between the inherited horizon and any horizon genuinely yours grows too large to be ignored. That moment is not comfortable, but it is the only point from which a real question can emerge. Not the question the system offers as an anticipated answer. The question you would formulate if the silence lasted long enough. A system that defines what matters before you can ask does not need censorship, does not need force, does not need surveillance. It only needs consistent anticipation to arrive with the map before you need one. To ensure that when you look around in search of direction, the direction is already there, apparently natural, apparently obvious, apparently yours. Meaning did not disappear from your life. It never got to be summoned, because the noise of the ready-made answers drowned out the silence where the true questions live. And the system organizes itself without central intent, but with structural efficiency, so that that silence never lasts long enough. The danger is not failing the race. The danger is winning it, and only then realizing that the track was built toward nowhere that is yours. This has no prescribed answer. There is no sequence of steps that transforms an inherited horizon into a genuine one, because that process, if it exists, cannot be anticipated by the same system that produced the problem. What exists is the question. bare, without an installed answer. If the silence lasted long enough, if the next objective did not arrive to fill it before it could, what would emerge in the space where the ready-made answer usually sits? You were never led to find out, and the system worked actively to ensure you never had to. Heidegger did not offer a way out of the impersonal. He offered visibility, the possibility of seeing the structure that operates as if it were reality, and distinguishing it, at least, from what would be genuinely chosen. That visibility does not resolve anything immediately, but it makes it impossible to keep confusing the inherited horizon with one's own. And that distinction, small as it seems, is the only starting point that was not anticipated by the system. The Antidote Philosophy channel exists to name these mechanisms, to ensure that the analysis the system would prefer you never conduct remains available with the precision it deserves. If that kind of thinking is what you want close, subscribe. The code does not stop. The difference is knowing that it exists and knowing that you are inside it.